From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Last night, trillions of dollars were stolen from the American people. But I got news for Mr. McConnell and for Mr. Ryan. They are not going to get away with that.
Early Saturday morning, Republican senators pushed through President Trump's massive tax overhaul, which would shower billions of dollars in tax cuts on corporations and the richest Americans, including President Trump's own family. We'll speak with Minnesota Democratic Congressmember Keith Ellison. Then to Honduras, where tens of thousands of protesters poured into the streets as the Electoral Commission has begun a recount of the contested presidential election. Last week, the Electoral Commission paused the counting of the votes when incumbent President Juan Orlando Hernandez was trailing opposition candidate Salvador Nasrallah, who's now calling on the Honduran military to stop the crackdown on protesters.
In this moment, I'm not calling on the generals of the armed forces or the colonels of the armed forces because they have already failed the people. Today, the 3rd of December of 2017, I'm calling on the base of the armed forces to rebel against your bosses.
At least 3 protesters have been killed so far. We'll go to Honduras for the latest. Finally, constitutional attorney John Boniface on the growing movement to impeach President Trump.
This is not about being dissatisfied about certain policies of the president. This is about the Constitution and the basic fundamental principle in this country that no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Senate Republicans have passed a sweeping rewrite of the U.S. tax code that will dramatically impact not only household income, but also health care, domestic spending, even oil and gas drilling. The plan would slash taxes by nearly $1.5 trillion, with most of the cuts benefiting major corporations and the richest Americans, including President Trump and his own family. The bill passed the Senate in the early morning hours of Saturday on a vote of 51 to 49, with every Democrat voting against the bill and all Republicans voting for it, except for Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee. Democrats blasted Republican leaders for only making the final text of the nearly 500-page bill available a few hours before the vote. The final draft had handwritten notes scribbled in the margin. Among those condemning the bill was Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders.
The legislation passed last night gives incredibly large tax breaks to the very, very wealthy. It raises taxes on millions of middle-class families. It leaves 13 million more Americans without health insurance. It raises health insurance premiums by 10% a year, and it raises the deficit by $1.4 trillion.
The bill would also roll back the estate tax on inherited wealth, which currently applies to about 5,000 of the wealthiest U.S. families. According to a report in Public Citizen, more than half of all registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C. worked on the tax bill. Republican leaders are preparing to form a conference committee to hash out differences between the bills passed by the House and Senate. We'll have more on Saturday's historic tax bill after headlines with Minnesota Democratic Congressmember Keith Ellison. President Trump's former national security advisor, General Michael Flynn, pleaded guilty Friday to a single felony count of lying to the FBI about conversations he had last December with Russia's ambassador to the U.S. Flynn's plea came as part of a deal that'll see him cooperate with special counsel Robert Mueller's probe into alleged Russian government meddling in the 2016 election and could see Flynn testify against President Trump and members of his inner circle. The deal also raises the prospect Flynn may have worn a wire for the FBI or otherwise secretly recorded conversations with administration officials. Documents handed to investigators as part of the plea deal show Flynn was ordered to speak with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak by a very senior member of presidential transition team, cited by many news outlets as Jared Kushner, President Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law. Kushner reportedly ordered Flynn to work with Russian officials to delay a UN Security Council vote on a resolution condemning illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. On Saturday, President Trump reacted to the news as he prepared to leave the White House for fundraisers in New York.
What has been shown is no collusion. No collusion. There's been absolutely no collusion, so we're very happy. And frankly, last night was one of the big nights.
Over the weekend, Trump lashed out against the Russia investigation, a series of tweets writing the FBI's reputation is in tatters and repeating his claim that former FBI Director James Comey lied when he testified that Trump asked him to call off the Bureau's investigation into Michael Flynn. In another tweet, Trump wrote, quote, "I had to fire General Flynn because he lied to the vice president and the FBI," unquote. Legal scholars say the tweet could be used to prove President Trump committed obstruction of justice when he fired Comey as FBI director. On Saturday, Trump's personal lawyer, John Dowd, claimed he was the one who drafted the tweet, saying he had made a mistake. In Honduras, thousands of protesters poured into the streets Sunday to denounce alleged election fraud and to support opposition presidential candidate Salvador Nasrallah.
Here we have the people defending our sovereignty, defending our vote, defending the rights of the people. If we do not defend our rights, then there will be no one here to defend us.
At least 3 people were killed as Honduran security forces opened fire on the protests. Among the victims, 19-year-old Kimberly Fonseca, who was shot in the head as soldiers opened fire on a blockade erected in the capital, Tegucigalpa, Friday night. The protesters charge Honduras' Electoral Commission, which is controlled by U.S.-backed incumbent President Juan Orlando Hernandez, with rigging the vote count and delaying its announcement of the outcome of the November 26 election. We'll have more on the crisis in Honduras later in the broadcast. In Yemen, there are conflicting accounts about the fate of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, with Iranian media reporting he was killed by Houthi rebels after an assault that blew up his residence in the capital, Sana'a. Saleh's office in Yemen is denying the reports, which came as Houthi rebels and forces aligned with Saleh fought pitched battles in the streets. The rebels have been in an uneasy alliance with Saleh's forces until he threw his support to the Saudi-led coalition Saturday, effectively switching sides. Meanwhile, an airstrike by the U.S.-backed Saudi-led coalition killed at least 12 people in the city of Sadr on Sunday. This is Megahid Gassar, who was badly wounded in the bombing.
They targeted my house while there were 18 to 20 guests. The whole family was inside, as well as our cattle. Everything is gone. There's nothing left.
On Saturday, top UN officials called on the Saudi-led coalition to lift its blockade of Yemen's Red Sea ports, warning, quote, "The threat of widespread famine in a matter of months is very real." In Syria, warplanes struck residences in the rebel-held city of eastern Ghouta near Damascus over the weekend, killing 27 civilians and injuring dozens more. Video posted by the White Helmet Civil Defense Group appears to show the workers pulling bodies from buildings reduced to rubble, with children among the injured and dead. In Israel, tens of thousands of people marched through Tel Aviv Saturday, calling for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to step down and for an end to government corruption. A bill expected to be approved by the Israeli Knesset next week would bar police from publishing findings in 2 investigations into Netanyahu, who's facing possible criminal charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Netanyahu has been accused of trading political favors for luxury gifts, including cigars and champagne and other crimes. Meanwhile, President Trump is expected to decide today whether the U.S. will recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital city and whether the U.S. will move its embassy there from Tel Aviv. Trump's planned announcement comes after senior advisor Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, told the Saban Forum in Washington, D.C. that Trump had not yet made a decision. Israel has occupied East Jerusalem since 1967, and Palestinian leaders have condemned any plans by the U.S. to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. In Malta, police have arrested 8 people in connection with the assassination of the investigative journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia, who died in October when a powerful bomb planted in her car exploded near her home. Police will have 48 hours to question the suspects before either charging or releasing them. Galizia is known for her work exposing corruption, tax evasion, and organized crime. Back in the United States, more than 5,000 people rallied at Utah's state capitol in Salt Lake City Saturday, protesting President Trump's plan to open up protected federal lands to mining, logging, drilling, and other forms of extraction. Trump's scheduled to visit Utah today, where he's expected to announce he's shrinking the Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante national monuments. On Sunday, over 100 protesters dressed in white lay on the lawn of the Utah Capitol building and spelled out the words, "Go home, Trump," with their bodies. Former Access Hollywood host Billy Bush has responded to reports that President Trump's denying the veracity of the 2005 videotape in which Trump boasts about sexually assaulting women. In a New York Times op-ed published on Sunday, Bush writes, quote, "President Trump is currently indulging in some revisionist history, reportedly telling allies, including at least one United senator, that the voice on the tape is not his. This has hit a raw nerve in me," said Bush. Bush writes he believes the stories of Natasha Stoynoff, Rachel Crooks, Jessica Leeds, and Jill Harth, who say Trump kissed them without consent, as well as Kristen Anderson's account that Trump groped her genitals at a New York nightclub in the 1990s. In California, former Republican governor and Hollywood star Arnold Schwarzenegger canceled a planned appearance at an awards dinner for California Common Cause Friday amidst renewed protests over his history of sexual harassment allegations. In 2003, the LA Times reported 6 women accused Schwarzenegger of groping, harassing, or humiliating them on movie sets or in other settings over a more than 20-year period. New York City's Metropolitan Opera has suspended longtime conductor James Levine over multiple sexual abuse claims. At least 3 men have accused Levine of abusing them decades ago when they were teenagers. Walmart has stopped selling a T-shirt that advocates for the lynching of journalists. The shirt, which was available in Walmart's online store, read, quote, "Rope, tree, journalist, some assembly required." The T-shirt made headlines last year when a Reuters photographer captured images of a man wearing it at a Donald Trump campaign rally in Minnesota 2 days before the election. Drugstore chain CVS said Sunday it'll purchase health insurer Aetna in a $69 billion mega-merger that could shake up the healthcare system. Analysts say the deal's likely to set off even more mergers in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries. And Australia's parliament is putting the finishing touches on a marriage equality bill after a sizable majority of Australians voted in favour of ending heterosexual-only marriage in a public referendum last month. As debate opened in Australia's House of Representatives today, Member of Parliament Tim Wilson addressed his partner Ryan Bolger, who was sitting in the Chamber's gallery.
This debate has been the soundtrack to our relationship. We both know this issue isn't the reason we got involved in politics. Give us tax reform any day. But in my first speech, I defined our bond by the ring that sits on both of our left hands, and that they are the answer to the questions we cannot ask. So there's only one thing left to do. Ryan Patrick Bolger, will you marry me? We'll put this.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's program with President Trump's tax bill. Just before 2 a.m. on Saturday morning, Republicans passed a nearly 500-page bill with dramatic impacts on not only the U.S. tax code, but also health care, domestic spending, even oil and gas drilling in the Arctic. The plan would cut taxes by nearly $1.5 trillion. Major corporations and the richest Americans, including President Trump and his own family, would reap the most dramatic benefits. The legislation includes slashing the corporate tax rate from 35% to 20% and giving further tax cuts to wealthy business owners. The Senate version would also dramatically cut the estate tax, while a House version of the plan passed last month would eliminate the estate tax entirely. Significantly, the Senate bill would also repeal the Affordable Care Act's individual mandate, which experts say would cause the cost of health insurance to skyrocket and lead to millions of people losing their health insurance. A little-known provision would even open one of the world's last pristine wildernesses, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, to oil and fracked gas drilling. According to a report in Public Citizen, more than half of all registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C. worked on the tax bill. Overall, the bill is expected to add $1.4 trillion to federal budget deficits over the next decade. The New York Times reports this debt will be offset by cuts to Medicare, Social Security, and other government programs that benefit the poor and middle class. Critics say these cuts could include ending access to chemotherapy and other cancer treatments. The bill passed the Senate 51-49, with every Democrat voting against the bill and all Republicans voting for it except Tennessee Republican Senator Bob Corker. This is Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders.
The legislation passed last night gives incredibly large tax breaks to the very, very wealthy. It raises taxes on millions of middle-class families. It leaves 13 million more Americans without health insurance. It raises health insurance premiums by 10% a year, and it raises the deficit by $1.4 trillion.
We're joined now by Minnesota Democratic Congressmember Keith Ellison, the first Muslim member of Congress. Ellison is also the deputy chair of the Democratic National Committee, or DNC. Congressman Ellison, welcome back to Democracy Now! Your response to this, well, in the dark of night passage of the tax bill that'll overhaul taxes in a way we haven't seen in decades.
Well, it's really designed to reorder our representative democracy. What they will do with these massive tax breaks is they will buy each other up in more mergers, which will concentrate markets and make it much more difficult for small businesses and workers. They'll also pay each other off and give each other more bonuses, which they will use to purchase political influence in Washington and state capitals all over the country. So you're talking about giving a lot of money to people who are already rich. They pretty much cannot use the money to spark consumer demand because they're already satiated from a financial standpoint, and will be raising taxes on many middle-class people and working-class people. So this is really, I think, more about reordering our society, creating a hereditary aristocracy in the United States, and really taking our country and leading it down a path where we will one day see a very tiny group of very, very, very rich elite people in an ocean of desperate people just trying to hang on and make it every single day. Not too much different from countries that we see around the world, like Honduras, where I recently visited.
And we're going to talk about Honduras in our next segment with you and Honduran activists. But I want to turn to President Trump speaking in New York City Saturday night after the Senate narrowly approved the tax overhaul.
Out of 52 Republican senators, 51 voted, and we ended up doing it, and we didn't need our great vice president to break the tie, Mike. We didn't need Mike. We didn't need anything. We voted. The Democrats left before the vote was even, somebody said started. Somebody said before it was over. I don't even care. But we got no Democrat help, and I think that's going to cost them very big in the election, because basically they voted against tax cuts. And I don't think politically it's good to vote against tax cuts.
Congressman Ellison, can you respond?
Well, I don't think it's good to vote for giving more money to people who certainly don't need it. And even Trump himself stands to benefit dramatically from these tax cuts. One of the things they're cutting is the alternative minimum tax. Last time we have tax returns for him was in 2005, where he paid about $31 million because of the alternative minimum tax. He won't have to pay that if this tax bill goes through. So not only is he reordering our constitutional democracy, he is personally enriching himself, which is not new because, of course, he's done it ever since he swore an oath to become president of the United States. Emoluments clause violations, all kinds of things, nepotism. It's just been a wash in filling up the swamp. And so, this is already the richest cabinet we've ever seen. And apparently they're not done yet, And again, it's not just money to buy luxury goods. It's money to reorder our constitutional democracy, which is why I am urging everybody to become the most effective grassroots activists you can. This is essential that we have a resurgence in democratic participation. And I don't mean big D Democrat. I mean small d Democrat. I mean getting involved in your neighborhood, your community. This is no time to say I'm not into politics. This is a time to go headlong into the welfare of this nation.
Congressman Ellison, the Senate tax bill would roll back the estate tax on inherited wealth, as you mentioned, which currently applies to about 5,000 of the wealthiest U.S. families. Following the vote, Iowa Republican Senator Charles Grassley praised the move, telling the Des Moines Register, I think not having the estate tax recognizing the people that are investing as opposed to those that are just spending every darn penny they have, whether it's on booze or women or movies. Congressman Ellison.
Well, the elites always want to shame the poor, right, and everyone else. I mean, the fact is this economy is based on 70% of the people driving consumer demand. If people do not purchase goods and services, this economy will grind to recession. And that is why, if you are going to do a tax cut, it ought to really be aimed at low-income and middle-income people. That might actually spur demand. But the way they've done it is to just give more people who already have everything. So the economic impact of getting rid of the estate tax will not be greater investment or greater consumer demand. It'll simply be more money for political influence, mergers, and more bonuses. In fact, let me just tell you, I mean, these taxes will literally worsen the economy. They will make the economy more sclerotic, if you will, because, it is really putting hands in the hands of working people that allows them to, open new businesses, do more hiring, and really do more for the economy. You put money in the hands of people who don't need it, all they're going to do is just what I already outlined, more political influence. And as has mentioned before, Amy, this economy already has the signs of plutocracy, already has the signs that it's at a point where the richest people are simply trying to extract wealth from the working and middle classes for themselves. This tax bill just makes that all the worst. And my last point on this is that, look, rich people already have a lot of money. There's literally trillions of dollars in cash held by corporations. Their stock valuations at an all-time high. They do not need a tax cut to do anything. They can invest now if they wanted to. They don't want to because they can make more money just by mergers and stock buybacks and stuff like that. So this is really just sort of a travesty.
I want to turn to a video about the tax plan posted on Twitter by Senator John Tester of Montana. The video went viral over the weekend. Tester tweeting a message with the video saying, quote, I was just handed a 479-page tax bill a few hours before the vote. One page literally has hand-scribbled policy changes on it that can't be read. This is Washington, D.C. at its worst. Montanans deserve so much better.
It's the night we're going to be voting on the tax bill. I just got the tax bill 25 minutes ago. This is the tax bill. See how thick it is? That's what it looks like. Oh, no, let's look at the bill. This is what it really looks like. I want you to take a look at this, folks. This is your government at work. Here's the bill as it's written. Here's the modifications that are in it. I can read one word. It's called add this language. Can you tell me what that word is? If you can, you got better eyes than me. This is unbelievable. We're doing massive tax reform on an absolute incredible timeline. This is going to affect everybody in this country. It's going to shift money from middle-class families to the rich. It's amazing. And we've been given this 20 minutes ago, 25 minutes ago. We're supposed to vote on it in a couple hours.
That was Senator John Tester of Montana. Congressman Ellison, can you explain what now happens next? That's the Senate. Your body of Congress is the House, of course. You have a slightly different tax plan. Explain, is this a done deal? For example, drilling in the Arctic given to Senator Murkowski of Alaska, the ending of the individual mandate under Obamacare. That's in the Senate bill, not in the House bill. Explain what happens now.
No, by no means is this a done deal. That's why we need activists to really, really kick it up a notch. I mean, the fact is that they're going to have a conference committee in order to get one unified House-Senate bill. And then they're going to have to repass it. So there will be at least one more vote in each House on the bill after it has been conferenced, because if you think back to your high school civics, you know what, you have to have the same bill passed through both houses, and then that is what will go to the president's desk for signature. So for activists who want to preserve constitutional democracy, who don't believe in hereditary aristocracy, who believe that teachers ought to be able to deduct the $250 of school supplies that they might spend their own money for in a classroom, then you still have time to fight this horrible piece of legislation. And, you know, Trump just said he didn't care whether he had any Democrats vote for it or not. He just said it. And he also said none of us voted for it. We can't vote for it. It's awful. It's really shocking that any Republicans voted for it. Is Corker the only one who wants to stand on his belief that mounting deficits are not good? My question for Republicans is, what happened to your concern about deficits? I thought you didn't like them. Suddenly they're okay. I mean, this is outrageous. They're literally borrowing money to give it to rich people and huge corporations, and it's just really a travesty. Now is the moment for real activism.
Congressman Ellison, I wanted to get to a bunch of headlines. Last week, President Trump drew international outrage after he retweeted 3 violent videos shared by a leader of a fringe right-wing group called Britain First. The videos purporting to show violence carried out by Muslims. Videos posted early Tuesday by Britain First deputy leader Jada Franson. 2 of the videos retweeted by Trump, which were filmed in Egypt and Syria, presented without context, were titled "Islamist Mob Pushes Teenage Boy Off Roof and Beats Him to Death," and "Muslim Destroys a Statue of Virgin Mary." Third video titled "Muslim Migrant Beats Up Dutch Boy on Crutches," shows one teenager kicking and punching another. The tweeted claim was widely reported as false, including by the Dutch embassy in Washington, D.C., which tweeted, quote, "Real Donald Trump, facts do matter. The perpetrator of the violent act in this video was born and raised in the Netherlands. He received and completed his sentence under Dutch law." Then White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders grilled by reporters over the videos.
Whether it's a real video, the threat is real, and that is what the president is talking about. That's what the president is focused on, is dealing with those real threats, and those are real no matter how you look at it.
So does it matter if it's a fake video?
Look, I'm not talking about the nature of the video. I think you're focusing on the wrong thing.
That's Trump's retweets drawing praise from his far-right supporters, including the Ku Klux Klan leader David Duke, who tweeted, "This is why we love Trump and why the fake news media hates Trump. He brings to light what the lying fake news media won't. The truth is the media covers up horrific numbers of racist hate crimes against white people." That was David Duke endorsing President Trump. Theresa May, his ally, the prime minister, conservative prime minister of Britain, condemning President Trump for what he's done. What do you feel has to happen now?
Well, I feel we have to denounce Donald Trump again for promoting racism and hatred and division. But I want folks listening to your broadcast to understand this is not just the ramblings of some old crazy guy. The fact is that Donald Trump knows that as he rifles money from the working and middle classes up to the super rich, he has to sow division among working people, because if working people and middle class people really take a look at his economic policy, they will come together and they will stop it. So what he has to do is to promote racism, hate the Muslims, hate the Latinos, hate the blacks, you know, have men and women at each other's throats, you know, make sure we repress the trans people. And he's trying to tell all of us Americans, that we are our own problem, not him. And that's not true. He's the problem. The fact is that Americans don't hate their Muslim neighbors. They don't hate their Latino neighbors. We have got to build human solidarity in this country, because human solidarity is what's going to allow us to come together to protect our democracy and to protect our economy. So reject the hate. Turn it away. Don't buy it, and reach out to a neighbor. He is trying to sow division so that he can distract us from what he's doing to us.
Congressman Ellison, President Trump's expected to decide today whether the U.S. will recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital city and whether the U.S. will move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Trump's planned announcement coming after senior advisor Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, told the Saban Forum in Washington, D.C. Trump hasn't decided yet. Israel's occupied, of course, East Jerusalem since '67. Palestinian leaders have condemned any plans by the U.S. to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. This coming as documents handed to investigators as part of the plea deal show General Flynn was ordered to speak with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak by a very senior member of the presidential transition team, cited by many news outlets as Jared Kushner. Kushner reportedly ordering Flynn to work with Russian officials to delay a UN Security Council vote on a resolution condemning illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. Start with the first part. Start with this week being declared Jerusalem Week by President Trump, and whether he will, what his decision will be.
Well, you know, I believe in a two-state solution, an Israeli state, a Palestinian state, side by side in peace and security. And so issues of where the capitals will be has always been something that is going to be negotiated in the course of a peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians. This unilateral departure from that is really upsetting, you know, the idea that we're going to have a negotiated settlement. It is simply something that will delay peace. It'll make it much more difficult to obtain peace in the Middle East. And it is, again, another dramatic departure from diplomacy, from negotiated settlements. It's just Trump, you know, stomping all over what we've been trying to do as a nation to foster a negotiated two-state solution for many, many years. So it's really a horrible tragedy. On the issue of Michael Flynn, he's already entered a plea of guilty. You know, I was a criminal defense lawyer for 17 years, and I can tell you that with all the bad things he did, if he only is pleading to this one charge of lying to the FBI, he probably is offering very substantial assistance. I don't know that. I'm not sharing privy information, but just based on my experience, I think Michael Flynn is going to be telling some things that Donald Trump might rather keep secret. But it's about time for some sunshine, about time for some things to come to light. So that's what I have to say about that.
And Congressman Ellison, the whole issue of sexual harassment in Congress, you have Congressmember Speer, who has introduced, a bill to change the law, Me Too Congress. You have Congressman Conyers, you have Senator Franken. Do you think Franken and Conyers should resign?
Well, you know, Amy, you know, here's the thing. I would ask every member of Congress, including those, to look inside their conscience and ask themselves just a few questions. Can you be effective? If you stood up your whole life to stand up for the rights of people, and both of them have, is it not a moment now where you apply some standards to yourself that you have asked others to live by? These are the questions. Can you be effective? Can you be there for your constituents at this point? These are questions that we all have to answer. I'll tell you this. When I am hoping for a society where every person, women, can go to work and just do their job without any fear of being harassed, mistreated, treated like second-class citizenship individuals. And the social trends that are driving us, I think, are leading our society to a better place. So, you know, I'll trust that they will do the right thing for their constituents, for our country. But I am looking forward to a safer, more respectful work environment for everyone.
But specifically,
as we move forward.
Specifically, should John Conyers resign?
I heard your question. I heard your question. I heard your question.
So you're not willing to say that?
I'm going to say that I'm going to ask them both to examine their conscience and do the right thing for all of us.
And of course,
and for them and for their legacies.
And of course, Senator Franken is your fellow congressional leader from Minnesota. You are answering this. Your response is the same for Senator Franken.
Right.
And what about the Me Too bill, the Me Too Congress bill that would change the laws around reporting? And among the issues, do you feel that the names of the Congress members who made settlements, paid out what the reports are something like $17 million of taxpayer money, should their names be made public, both retroactively and going forward?
Well, let me tell you, on this issue of the $17 million, I mean, the facts do matter. As a journalist, I know you agree with that. And it's all that $17 million was not about sexual harassment claims.
Right,
so
also racial harassment and other issues.
Well, right. And so the bottom line is, you know, it is important to understand what those settlement payouts were actually about. And not all of them were about sexual harassment in particular. Now, regarding the bill, I think that it is an important piece of legislation. I believe in reading bills and going through to make sure that we understand the implications of it. Getting testimony, things like that, I think are really critically important. I'll tell you that we need greater level of transparency and sunshine. At the same time, you know, will we discourage victims from coming forward if they're not ready to be totally public about what happened to them? Is there a place for a settlement process? I think that their
names don't have to be made public. Their names don't have to be made public, the accusers. But when there is a settlement, the American people have a right to know who is settling and what for.
Well, you know, they might. I think this is a very – see, here's the thing. The answer to your question is this. This is a piece of legislation that we have got to examine, get testimony on, hear how it will implicate everybody. In Congress, we have hearings on stuff like this. At this point, I would want to hear from victims what they think about the law. I'd want to hear some testimony on that. I think if this law helps to bring light to these horrible tragedies, that's a good thing. I think if it would dissuade the resolution of a case, that might be an impact that we haven't, that we're not fully aware of yet, that we might want to really think about before we move in that direction. The point is this: it's the specific piece of legislation, in my mind, is not as important as the fact that Jackie Spear is driving a critical issue that we all have to examine and is pushing us to a fairer, safer, more respectful workplace. That is the real issue. In terms of the particulars of the bill, we will continue to examine them, but I am hopeful that that the work that Jackie Spear is doing and many others will bring us to a safer, more respectful workplace, and I think that's the most important thing about this.
Congressman Ellison, we'd like you to stay with us as we are going to turn now to the issue of Honduras and the crisis that is developing there. We're going to break and then come back to Honduras, where thousands of people have taken to the streets to protest what many are calling an electoral coup d'etat. Stay with us.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the honey drippers in the house tonight, and they just got back from Washington, D.C. I think they got something they want to say. can't do that, man. No. Impeach the president. Shut up, fool.
That's Impeach the President by the Honey Drippers here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn to Honduras, where tens of thousands of protesters have poured into the streets to denounce alleged election fraud and to support opposition presidential candidate Salvador Nasrallah.
We are protesting here to call on the Electoral Tribunal to fulfill what the people have decided, the vote of the people for a president that the people have already chosen.
The election pits U.S.-backed President Juan Orlando Hernandez against Nasrallah, head of the Alliance Against the Dictatorship, a coalition party that's supported by former leftist President Manuel Zelaya, who was ousted in a U.S.-backed coup in 2009. Hernandez was widely expected to win the November 26 election, despite growing concerns about his consolidation of power and the militarization of Honduras. But in a surprise upset, early election results showed Nasrallah leading Hernandez by 5 points. The Electoral Commission, which is controlled by the incumbent President Hernandez, then inexplicably stopped publishing election results for a day and a half. By the end of the week, the commission resumed publishing election results and claimed Hernandez had taken the lead. On Friday, Hernandez's government suspended constitutional rights and imposed a military curfew. At least 3 people have been killed in recent days as Honduran security forces have opened fire against protesters. Among the victims, 19-year-old Kimberly Fonseca, who was shot in the head as soldiers opened fire against a blockade erected by protesters in the capital, Tegucigalpa, Friday night. Under mounting pressure, the commission has agreed to hold a partial recount of the vote, which Nasrallah has rejected as being too limited. Instead, at the protest Sunday, Nasrallah called on the low-level members of the military to rebel against the generals and stop enforcing the curfew and the crackdown against protesters.
In this moment, I'm not calling on the generals of the armed forces or the colonels of the armed forces because they have already failed the people. Today, the 3rd of December of 2017, I'm calling on the base of the armed forces to rebel against your bosses.
For more, we're joined by 3 guests, but we're going to start with Minnesota Congressmember Keith Ellison. Keith Ellison, you recently were in Honduras. This is an issue you have been concerned about for years. Can you talk about what's happening there, the U.S. connection to the current president, and what you think needs to happen?
Well, I think that we need a full examination of the U.S. relationship with Honduras relative to the years of security aid we've been sending down there and just the dramatic violence that is suffered by women, activists, and people who are struggling for a more fair and democratic Honduras. You know, the fact of the matter is that earlier in the election process, it looked as though Nasrallah was ahead. They slowed down the process, and then now that's all of a sudden Juan Orlando Hernandez is ahead. It looks like there was tampering with the election process. This is highly irregular, and it appears as though there has been a reversal in terms of the election outcomes from Nasrallah to Hernandez, and this is deeply troubling. I can tell you that, you know, going back many years, I've been concerned about activists in Honduras, people like Berta Cáceres, who was simply an indigenous woman trying to protect her land, organizing, and was won the Goldman Prize for environmental activism, and then was shot and killed very suspiciously. There are members of the military that have been even accused of doing it, and the election and the investigation has been quite messy. Now, after you see this election, people having some hope that they might be able to get some democracy, then in the middle of the election count, we see this reversal. So I'm concerned, deeply concerned, and will continue to be monitoring this situation.
And the situation of the U.S. Giving millions of dollars in aid to the military in Honduras, a military that's now cracking down on protesters, possibly involved with an electoral coup d'etat. What about that U.S. support for what's going on there? And do you think it should be stopped? $114 million in military security and other security.
We have something called the Berta Cáceres Human Rights Act, which says that we should suspend military security aid until such time as it can be objectively determined and certified that this aid is not being used to repress and suppress, legitimate actors who are engaging in protected First Amendment type activity that is no different from anything we would expect activists to do here in order to raise consciousness around the issues that they care about. In Honduras, we've seen activists, whether they're small farmers, whether they're women's rights activists, no matter journalists, we've seen them getting killed and harassed and abused. And we have the Bertie-Costas Act, which we're pushing forward right now. And so we would like to see that bill enacted. And if enacted, it would suspend aid until it could be certified that the rights of folks are no longer being trampled upon as they try to seek a more democratic Honduras. Mm.
Well, Congressman Keith Ellison, we want to thank you for being with us, recently back from Honduras, long concerned about the situation there. When we come back from break, we'll be joined by a Honduran human rights activist, Zenaida Velasquez, one of the founders of the Committee of Relatives of the Disappeared in Honduras, lost her sister during demonstrations in 2011. And we'll also go to Honduras directly to talk about what's happening there on the ground. Stay with us.
En la casa de la justicia de mi país y comprobé que es un templo de encantadores, de serpientes. Dentro se está como en espera de alguien que no existe. Temibles abogados perfeccionan el día y su azul dentellada. Perfeccionan el día y su azul dentellada. Jueces sombríos hablan de pureza.
Honduran musician Carla Lara performing here in our Democracy Now! Studios. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue on the crisis in Honduras, where tens of thousands of protesters poured into the streets Sunday to denounce alleged election fraud and to support opposition presidential candidate Salvador Nasrallah. Last week, the Electoral Commission pausing the counting of the votes when the incumbent president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, was trailing opposition candidate Salvador Nasrallah, who's now calling on the military to stop the crackdown on protesters. We're joined by Honduran human rights activist Zenaida Velasquez. She's one of the founders of the Committee of Relatives of the Disappeared in Honduras. Her sister, Ilse Velasquez, was a teacher who was killed during a demonstration in March 2011. Her brother, Manfredo Velasquez, was abducted and disappeared by Honduran security forces decades ago in 1981. Joining us from Honduras is Matt Ginsburg-Jekyll, one of the founding members of the Honduras Solidarity Network, a member of the group La Voz de los de Abajo, and a longtime friend of murdered environmental organizer Berta Cáceres, who welcome you both to Democracy Now! I'm going to begin with Zenaida Velasquez. What do you understand is happening right now, and what are you calling for, Zenaida?
Morning, Amy. What is happening is the risk of a general strike in the entire country because they are opposing all this curfew that certainly is mostly a coup d'etat. And so the possibility of having a general strike, because people say if they are imposing this curfew to us from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., so let's us act from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and do a general strike that we have to stop this rigged electoral vote, these blatantly rigged electoral results. It's incredible how they have hacked the system 3 times, and then all of a sudden when they reactivate the system, Juan Orlando is ahead of Salvador Nasralla. This is completely outrageous. It's blatant, really, that they are talking about this when on Sunday, actually Monday, early morning, about 2 a.m., finally the first results were given, and Salvador Nasralla was winning for 5 points after counting 67% of the acts. And then the rest, 33%, was going to be done the rest of the days. And it's a week already, it's more than a week already, and they are still playing with those results. And that's why the people is completely frustrated and angry. And the most amazing thing is that it is mostly youth. Yesterday we had between 500 to 600,000 people on the streets only in Tegucigalpa. And it's mostly youth. It's about 80% of the youth that are doing this, and accompanied, of course, by the rest of the people. But as I was saying, San Pedro Sula, Santa Barbara, Copan, Choluteca, everywhere they were demonstrating, and they say, who is afraid of anything here?
I wanted to bring Matt Ginsberg-Jekyll into the conversation. Matt, can you tell us just where you are in Honduras and what you see happening on the ground?
I am in Tegucigalpa. I've been here for several days. I've been in the country for about 10 days, and it's really eerie and surreal. It's hard to know what words to pick to describe what's been happening in these days. I spent a good portion of the last few days doing human rights monitoring, both in the protests and at the Hospital Escuela, the main public hospital in Tegucigalpa, which is really ground zero to see how this military siege is playing out. Ambulance after ambulance, truck after truck, taxi after taxi come pouring through the gates, bringing wounded protester after wounded protester. And these are protesters being wounded by live ammunition, Amy. It's unreal. There's not enough room for them. In the emergency room, they're leaving some people that are shot just in the leg waiting for up to an hour because they have so many other cases to attend to. And it's a state of complete impunity. I was at the Hospital Escuela when the curfew was called. They gave 1 hour notice, and we were in the middle of documenting severe violations of human rights when we had to all be rushed out to get home safely ourselves. But I also want to emphasize there's another side of what's going on here. One moment is the moment that we're there and watching these grave violations of human rights. The other moments are the moments that we're seeing this brave people that are refusing to give up and are refusing to accept this fraud. The night after, it's actually being called, that first night of the toque de queda, curfew, has been calling the Black Night because of the amount of death, because of the amount of blood that was shed. That next day, there was what's called a cacerolazo, the banging of pots and pans. And when you step outside the doors in Tegucigalpa, it sounded like there wasn't a single household in the whole city that wasn't banging pots and pans. It was a symphony of pots and pans, of joy, of yelling, of open defiance. In many neighborhoods, people were flooding out of their homes in open defiance of extreme levels of militarization and making very clear that the will of the Honduran people is not broken. And the next day after that, there was over 100,000 in the streets, as you've already reported.
Matt, can you describe a case that you intervened in? You saw the military chasing a group, beating a man. Describe what happened and where it was.
Yeah, so we were along the Boulevard Centro America. It was on Thursday, and the military was chasing after a group of protesters that had been maintaining a blockade. The military had, through extreme excessive use of tear gas, been able to dislodge the blockade and was chasing after a number of people. It was a group of approximately 10 young women plus a couple, middle-aged couple, and they turned around a corner and started running as fast as they could, and right after them came military that were yelling with foul language, yelling, "We're going to get you, I won't use the actual language they used. and running at full speed. So I decided, me and a colleague of mine decided to run as fast as we could after the military. Unfortunately, we were a few steps behind them. By the time we got to them, the man was already bloodied in the face, but we were able to insert ourselves between the military and the man and his wife, who were the ones that the military had caught up with, and told the military that we were from International Human Rights and to please stop and let us know if there was accusations, and that if there wasn't, that they needed to leave these people alone. And the military responded to that by swinging their bat towards me in an intimidating manner, but finally deciding to run back down the hill.
And the woman who was killed, the teenager, 19 years old, Kimberly Fonseca, on Friday night. Can you tell us her story?
Yes, she was, unfortunately, that wasn't one of the cases I personally documented. I know that she was one of the people that was out banging pots and pans and out in the neighborhood when the curfew had been called, showing defiance, and that the military opened fire and shot her, I believe, in the head, and she was pronounced dead on the site. I went to the morgue to try to verify the details of the case, but there's two morgues here, and the one that I was at in the Hospital Escuela is the one where people go to after they've died in the hospital, not the one they've been brought in dead to. But she's one of, I'm hearing 6 cases now. I know that I've been able to confirm at least 4 of those cases of people around the country who have been killed by live ammunition by the military.
Zenaida Velasquez, The Intercept is reporting the president of Honduras is deploying U.S.-trained forces against election protesters. And, of course, the amount of money the U.S. has poured into the Honduran military and other security over the last years since the coup d'etat in 2009 is well over $100 million, could be $200 million. What are you calling for now?
We are calling to stop this military aid. Juan Orlando is preparing. He has also, apart from the army, he has an imperial police that obeys to him, and he has prepared this police to kill. I know that the order is to kill, to shoot the people directly, to kill them. And the other rumor that is going on, Amy, is that today he's back. He will be back in Honduras after being in the United States, searching for help, more help and support, and that they are going to decide that he's the winner. And if all these protests, if all these demonstrations, if all this outcry from not only Honduras but international outcry is not heard and he is declared the winner, I think we will see rivers of blood, because those people are going to kill. They have given the order to shoot directly to the people.
And Matt, the demands of the people on the ground, we only have 20 seconds.
The demands of the people on the ground, first of all, there was 5,000 tally sheets of votes that were introduced directly from the Electoral Tribunal's headquarters in Tegucigalpa right after the system went down for 8 hours, and it was at that point that the tendency reversed. They want every single one of those scrutinized. They want the illegal and unscrupulous regime, scurrilous regime of Juan Orlando Hernandez to come to an end. It's a dictatorship. He was an illegal candidate from the beginning. The people want the restoration of democracy and an end to the human rights.
We're going to have to leave it there for now, but of course we'll continue to cover this developing story. Matt Ginsburg, Jekyll of Honduras Solidarity Network, and Zenaida Velasquez, Honduran human rights activist. That does it for our show. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.